Mr. P. Sainath is a veteran journalist who focuses on social and economic inequalities, deprivation, and poverty, particularly in rural India. He is the recipient of over 60 national and global awards for journalism, including the Magsaysay Award. Mr. Sainath has also declined several awards, including India's prestigious civilian award called the Padma Bhushan. He states he believes journalists should never accept prizes and rewards from the governments that they cover and critique. Mr. Sainath has been a journalist since 1980, with significant experience covering rural India, spending most of the years in India's poorest regions, writing for India's largest newspapers. More recently, his path-breaking reporting placed India's ongoing agrarian crisis and farmer suicides on the national agenda. Nearly 10 years ago, Mr. Sainath launched the People's Archive of Rural India, also known as PARI. PARI is an independent, free-access, multimedia digital platform creating a unique database entirely dedicated to rural India. In just 8 years, it has won 60 awards. Mr. Sainath has been a professor of writing at Princeton and has been conferred doctorates by prestigious international universities. In India, he has taught journalism for the last 36 years. His book, Everybody Loves a Good Drought, has been declared a Penguin classic. And his new book, The Last Heroes, Foot Soldiers of Indian Freedom, has hit a 4th print within 7 months. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. P. Sainath.
Thank you very much, Sana. And my thanks to the MSF for giving me this opportunity. COVID-19 actually gave us, in India as in many other countries, COVID-19 gave us a brilliant, if unsparing autopsy of the society we are. That's what it did. The corpse was on the table, every nerve, sinew, organ, vein, artery, brutally visible. It's not as if that corpse was not there before, but this time it was much harder to turn your head away. It was much harder, but I believe we are getting there. We are managing indeed quite admirably to turn our heads away. COVID-19 was not a great leveler. In fact, the billionaires from the health sector in India outshone every other category of dollar billionaires in the 24 months of the lockdowns and the pandemic officially. As the title tells you, I believe, inequality is injurious to your health. ESP stands for economic, social, and political diseases. Because that's what are really most of the issues you're looking at in health. Very often the causes and the solutions are outside the health sector. And the more we remind ourselves of that, the better, or we will be trying to deal with things like a bunch of diseases. Here's what happened with COVID not being a leveler and the amount of plunder made out of COVID-19 in India. In India, which has the 3rd largest number of dollar billionaires in the planet, believe it or not, for all the bragging we do about tech, the number of health sector billionaires is double the number of tech billionaires in India. health sector billionaires have risen. I use the word health sector. I just detest this word health care. There is no element of care in it and very little health. But there's a lot of cash. Maybe you ought to call it the health cash sector. 2014, yeah, they were worth, health sector billionaires in this country were worth $30.45 billion. In 2018, they were worth $59.5 billion. In 2022, they were worth $112.9 billion, an increase in net worth of 270%. On March 31, 2022, at the end of the national COVID plan and the last lockdowns, there were $32 billionaires in the health sector, 31 in manufacturing. They overtook manufacturing during the pandemic, and 16, a mere 16 tech billionaires. Tech was booming with online education and digitization. Yet there were twice as many dollar billionaires in the health sector as there were in tech. Now, the combined net worth of health sector dollar billionaires is way ahead, per capita and aggregate, way ahead of those in manufacturing and tech. The net worth of each group at the close of lockdowns and at the end of the national COVID-19 plan, March 31, 2022. Tech had 16 billionaires worth $59.5 billion. Manufacturing had 31 billionaires worth $79.2 billion. Health had 32 billionaires worth $112.9 billion. Those converting health crisis into cash were way ahead of both tech tycoons and manufacturing. Now, by the way, this should not, it should scandalize you, but it should not surprise you. It's called disaster capitalism. It happens after every major calamity. The last time it happened on a great scale was after the 2004 December tsunami. Now, 11 countries were devastated by the tsunami. Okay? Out of which 5 countries, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Sri Lanka, had anything approaching significant stock exchanges. Now, these countries were the worst affected. Indonesia lost 250,000 human beings. India, as always, there are 6 different figures, and the government figure will be accepted. The lowest will be accepted as the final, the truth spoken by the oracle. So, but here's the thing. Within a week, those 5 countries worst affected, within a week of the tsunami, all 5 stock exchanges had crossed records since their founding as stock exchanges. The Sensex, sensitive index of the Bombay Stock Exchange, struggling to beat that 4,000 mark, went past the 6,000 mark in no time, in a week, and never looked back. And now what is it, 20th in the 20,000s, 30? I have no idea. But it's 3, 4, 5 times, at least 3 times as much. Indonesia, where 250,000 people died, and where the aftershock earthquakes set the stock exchange building rocking, the stock exchange building actually rocked. But the index went through the roof. As our neoliberal economists like saying, there were some problems, but the fundamentals were strong. Well, the Yeah, so the fundamentals were shaky and rocking, but the fundamentals were shaky, but the economy rocked. Yeah? Because we think that the stock exchange is the economy. In Colombo, the composite share index went past the highest since its founding. The SETI in Thailand and the KLSE, the Kuala Lumpur Stock Exchange in Malaysia, likewise set some kind of record or the other. Much of this was driven by the smell of the reconstruction dollar. Okay? It then led to a boom in countries totally unaffected by the tsunami as well, because that's where the relief material was going to come from. Yeah? And your steel and reconstruction stuff and pipes and whatever. So you then saw in Western nation stock exchanges as well a boom. Here, it came out of the desperation of billions of people, in India a billion, for some kind of access to health, something to save them from dying. Okay? And that's that. Now that's one section in which, by the way, Indian billionaires are a tribe in themselves. In 1991, when we embraced the brave new world of liberalization, globalization, privatization, there were 0 billionaires. All the numbers on billionaires are coming from Forbes. Incidentally, it's the only index that the government of India does not challenge, okay, and does not think is a conspiracy. So we had $0 billionaires in 91, or if there were one or two, they were very modest about it. In 2009, we had $8 billionaires. In 2012, 48. In 2013, 56. I'm giving you this 2012-13 figure because at the same time when we had 56 billionaires, the government of India's socio-economic caste census showed us 75% of rural households in this country. And there are 180 million rural households in this country. 75% of rural households, the main breadwinner takes home less than 5,000 rupees or less. If you raise the bar to 10,000 rupees, which at the time was $140. In those days, 5,000 rupees was about $70, and 10,000 rupees was $140. So 75% of rural households, main breadwinner, not the household, main breadwinner took home $70 or less. If you raise the bar to 10,000, then 90% of rural households did not meet that mark. Just 8.4% of rural households had a breadwinner taking home more than $140 a month. By 2020, cusp of the pandemic, we declared ourselves shut down or under lockdown on the midnight of March 24th, 25th, 2020. But Forbes, by the way, my friends accuse me of, quite justifiably, of being obsessed with Forbes. And one of my friends who is a shrink tells me that there's basically a deep-rooted subconscious desire to wake up and find my name on the list. Which I want, that would be nice, but a bit unlikely. Forbes always releases its list on March 8th, for some reason on International Women's Day, though there are very few women in the list. But that's how they come. On March 8th, 2020, India had $98 billionaires. Now, please consider that in the first 20 years, we added dollar billionaires at an average rate of 4.8 every year. But in the first 12 months of the pandemic, it took us 20 years to put up 98 or 100 or 102. That figure varies if I look at Forbes. But in the first 12 months of the pandemic, yeah, we added 42 new dollar billionaires. That is, we added over 3. We minted a new billionaire every 9.5 days. Every 9.5 days, we minted a new billionaire. It took us 70 days to mint one, each of the preceding 98. Here, 9.5 days. The miracles health can do. Yeah. At the end of the lockdown, as of March 31, 2022, we had 166 billionaires. In the 24 months of our lockdowns and pandemic in India, other countries had declared lockdowns earlier, but in the 24 months of the pandemic and lockdowns, we added 98, about 66 or 68 dollar billionaires. Now, we stand third in the number of dollar billionaires in the world. You know, earlier we climbed our way all up from the bottom. For a few years, we were number 5 or number 6. China and Russia used to be ahead of us. We took care of that. I mean, you know, anyway, Russia actually for several years had more, but remember the moral difference. I mean, the Russians send half their billionaires to prison every 5 years. We send us to parliament. Literally, you can check. Some of those lists on the Forbes, some of those names on the Forbes list are gracing our nation's parliament. So that's where you are in terms of what happened in health money, in the health cash sector, as I call it, during the pandemic. And that's where our billionaires are. Please know that now we have 174 billionaires as of July this year. Do know that in a population of 1.4 billion, they constitute 0.00014% of your population, but account for nearly 20% or a fifth of your GDP. That's why you have that inequality is injurious to your health. Now, this shows up in different sectors differently, okay? Oh, yeah, by the way, at the same time that 31 men and 1 woman made themselves billionaires in the health sector, India accounted for perhaps the largest chunk of value of unpaid female labor in the world. You're all familiar with the ILO and Oxfam figures that every year, every day, every 24 hours, women and adolescent girls across the world put in the care sector. I'm linking it, okay? In the care sector, women and adolescent girls above the age of 15 put in 12.5 billion hours of unpaid care work every day, every year of their lives. And that, by the way, is above 15. In India, millions of young girls, a couple of 100,000 from Jharkhand in the city of Delhi, below the age of 15, are full-time servants in households looking after the children of the rich and the middle classes. Okay? So, we anyway constitute the biggest chunk of that figure. Just the numbers will tell you that, if not the cash value. By the way, that 12.5 billion hours of unpaid care work put in by women and adolescents is calculated to be worth $10.8 trillion by Oxfam. And $10.8 trillion is more than the value of the top 5 global tech giants. That's how much it is. It's bigger than the tech sector. global tech sector. So women, as I said, surely all this has some impact on the health of women, right? I mean, it's not, you don't have to be Einstein to figure that out, that kind of impact. Then another sector of impact. One of the things we are proudest of and couldn't keep but boasting about during the pandemic was the miracle of online education. A hell of a lot of people became billionaires. Baiju's now in the dumps or on the edge of the abyss of the garbage dump, is increased its value threefold. Yeah. What actually happened to children in this miracle of online education? And I'm trying to show you that inequality, education, and health are so closely linked. Let me give you a picture. This is percentage of persons of age 5 years and above with the ability to operate computers in India. This is the latest data from 2019, the National Sample Survey Organization's social indicators of social consumption in education. Please note something. The more egalitarian a state, the better the access to net and computers, which are incredibly important for health in our time. Okay? So if you look at the fact, relatively the most egalitarian states in India are Kerala and Tamil Nadu. The smallest of inequality gaps are in these states. And note that women in rural Kerala, their ability to operate a computer is higher than the figure for urban males. Rural women in Kerala have much greater ability to operate a computer than urban males in Madhya Pradesh at 29.9%, Uttar Pradesh 28.5%, Bihar at 20.4%, and Chhattisgarh at 30.2%. Kerala rural women is 34.8. All the other numbers I've given you are for urban men. The lower the inequality, the greater the reach of technology, of health, of net, of access. Let me give you some examples of what happened with it in the schools and colleges. But one more table. That was computers, this is internet. Yeah, percentage of persons of age 5 years and above who actually used the internet in the 30 days preceding the survey. Again, you'll find that 35.1% of females in Kerala are able to use the internet, whereas that's more than urban men in the country's biggest state, Uttar Pradesh, equal to, and more than 34.7 figure for Bihar. Now, one of the things we did, I am the founder, editor of an organization, of a multimedia digital platform called People's Archive of Rural India. I gave a task to my reporters. I asked them to go out to the Adivasis are what in the West you'd call indigenous people. I asked them to go to the Adivasi areas of Maharashtra, where we are, which is Palghar, Thane, places like that, and also to Dalit Bastis, the so-called untouchables at one time. I asked them to just give me the answer to one question. Write any story you like, but I want an answer to one question. Online education was at its peak and we were thumping our chests in front of the world. I just asked our reporters, Parth Emin, Jyoti Shinoli, find me how many Adivasi girls and Dalit girls 18 years and below own a smartphone. or any phone on which they can download the online education PDFs. They came back and said, not only could we not find a single one in those communities, it was pretty bad even in the other communities, much more advanced socially than the Adivasis and the Dalits. Yeah. Now, how did an Adivasi girl typically function in that situation? In the area called Palghar, 70 kilometers from where I live in Maharashtra, in Mumbai, her elder brother and her father might have phones. One or both of them might have smartphones. A lot of poor people, migrant laborers particularly, migrant laborers, refugees, all take loans to buy smartphones because from where they're working, they have to send money home. And that phone they take loans. Sometimes they take 2 loans and buy 2 phones to give one to the kids at home for online education. Now, the poor Adivasi girl or Dalit girl in Thane, what did she do? Her brother and father typically would be working at a brick kiln, almost like semi-bonded laborers in a brick kiln, quite a distance away from their village. So they would go and they would come back on the weekend. They'd come back on Sunday. So the girl is waiting for Sunday, then has to beg brother or big brother or daddy. If it's big brother, you got to beg, okay? Because that's his entertainment. He's not going to give it to you to do some stupid studies. He's dropped out of school already. The girl begs, gets that phone for that day, and now finds that she has to add 200 rupees to broaden the package and bandwidth in order to download 200 PDFs. Now, if she downloads the PDFs, they have no money to print them out. They don't have printers and computers. They don't have damn phones at home. So, by the time she's downloaded, it's time for daddy to go back to the kiln, taking his phone. And the bandwidth there is so poor, the network is so poor, it takes hours to download those PDFs. So she'll not be able to download more than a fraction of them. Now, this is what the classrooms were like in the Adivasi times. Oh, another thing, another direct impact on health, India's midday meal for children, the free midday meal was completely disrupted. So, and then, by the way, when midday meals are disrupted, please know that the worst affected will be the girl child. Because at home, there is a bias in the diet in favor of the boy. The girl will get less to eat. That is a fact of life. It's who we are. Okay? So this is one. And this was one of the least known and one of the deadliest impacts of the pandemic lockdown on schools and girls. In India, there is a giant program in each state giving free sanitary napkins to millions and millions of girls. Those sanitary napkins are distributed to girls between the age group 11 and 18 in schools and colleges. That collapsed. It collapsed with the shutting of the schools. Millions of young girls returned to using very insanitary, unhealthy pieces of cloth, leaves, and other stuff because there were no more sanitary napkins. Now, this is one of the sad cases we came across. Muzaffar Beg, a UP boy, 11 years old or 13 years old, I can't remember which. The guy is borrowing his uncle's smartphone. He's borrowing his uncle's smartphone, selling vegetables, yeah? And he's got his smartphone in his pocket or sometimes on the cart. And he is selling vegetables and he is attending class, okay? And then a client comes along, a customer comes along, and he is begging the teacher, "Madam, please give me 5 minutes leave." Please give me 5 minutes leave. I'll attend to the customer and return to the class. Yeah. This was the first person we met on the streets of Latur, our reporter met. A very young girl carrying a huge thing of vegetables, lower middle class. She'd never done this before in her life. The lockdown meant no school, no midday meal, no education, and she was selling vegetables for her family. By the way, her brother too was carrying a much lighter load than she was and doing that. It's simple. You can't have a healthy planet with hungry people. India now ranks 107th in the list of, in the Global Hunger Index, which is for 121 nations. We were once 94, now we are 107 out of 121. The nation that is number 3 in the Forbes billionaires list is number 132 in the United Nations Development Programme's Human Development Index. In the World Press Freedom Index, we have fallen to 161 out of 180. And record of records, in the Environmental Performance Index of Yale and Columbia, India scores an incredible 180 out of 180 nations. Now, I need to remind you one thing about our billionaires. In 24 months, they doubled their wealth as compared to 2018. But they doubled their wealth in 2021 in a year when India's GDP shrank 7.7%. Whatever happened to all that economics? The GDP shrank 7.7%. 118 million people were said by the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy to have lost their jobs in India in the month of April 2020. GDP shrinks 7.7%. India's billionaires double their wealth to nearly $800 billion. So that is yet, by the way, all these 4 indexes have been declared as biased, even conspiracies, by officialdom in India. We looked at, in Pari, what happened to livelihoods, not just those urban jobs that were being counted, what happened to livelihoods. Typically, the Indian media accompanied, all heard of the mass reverse migrations, call them internally displaced, involuntarily displaced, or voluntary displaced, or refugees. Just don't call them beneficiaries, please. And, call them what you like. As they marched back, do you know how many of them there were? You any idea how many such people were there? On March 31st, 2020, the Attorney General of India told the Supreme Court of this country, there is not a single migrant on the highways now. As of 11 a.m., March 31, 2020. That's a sworn affidavit in front of the Supreme Court on behalf of the government of India. 7 days later, the same gentleman, the same Attorney General, tells the same Supreme Court in a different affidavit, governments have opened 22,567 relief centers. For whom? There was nobody on the streets. Okay? For what did you open that? For which phantom? Kis chidiya ke liye? Then, incidentally, they did not mention, except in the annexures, that Kerala, the single state of Kerala, accounted for 68% of all the health and relief camps. And as you all know, Kerala handled that. Kerala came to be praised across the world for how it handled that pandemic. Okay? It did not mention, the affidavit did not mention, though it gave the number, that non-governmental organizations, NGOs, apart from Kerala, which was at the top with 68%, NGOs ran more relief camps than any state government in this country. NGOs ran 3,009 camps or something like that. 3,909. Yeah, so how the role these things played, information, the net. I mean, just imagine what impact, when you want to look at what impact, when you saw what impact the net had on people, please consider this state, and now not a state, in this country called Kashmir, which has experienced internet blockades for nearly a year without break. What happens to those people? What happens when you have a medical emergency? What happens when you have any damn thing? Yeah? 1 year of blockade. We are the internet, we are number one in that list also. Most internet blockades have happened here. On April 7th, he said 22,000 relief camps. But you know what? The government's machinery gives away how many people actually left the cities and went back to the villages. On May 28th, the Indian Railways put out a notice, and I congratulate them because I think the Indian Railways did an unbelievably terrific job. I say that sincerely. In 27 days, the Indian Railways carted 9.1 million reverse migrant workers. That means they used 4,000 plus trains, and the tickets were 85% borne by the railways and 15% by the state governments, which did not stop a lot of operators from fleecing the workers. These were trains only for migrant workers escaping to their homes. They were called Shramik trains, Shramik special trains. 9.1 million in 27 days they carted people. And that doesn't account for all those who traveled ticketless. In India, traveling ticketless is quite a standard and honorable thing to do. What do you mean when you say public transport? It's meant for the public. Yeah. So these 7 guys were accompanied by our reporter on the last stretch of their 800-kilometer walk from Telangana to Gadchiroli in Maharashtra. 800 kilometers they walked through tiger territory, through leopard territory, to Project Tiger areas. They walked day and night, encountering wild animals, and came back. Millions and millions did not go by trains, they went by walk. Millions of others went by bus, by lorry, by transport, by any means that they could find. Imagine what happened to people like nomadic pastoralists who had herds of 200 camels, 50 camels, 80 camels. How did they look after them? What happens if you are a nomadic pastoralist with huge herds of animals like this? India has more communities of nomadic pastoralists than any other nation in the world. Now look at what happened to kids, okay? Because of the extent of child labor. These are children from Chhattisgarh working 200 kilometers away in the chili fields of Telangana. When the lockdown came, the owners of the chili fields calmly shut down those things and said, goodbye guys, you're on your own. So all of them had to walk back 200 kilometers. On that infamous journey was a 12-year-old called Jamlo. Janat Mela. Jamlo was her pet name. She was 12 years old. She walked 160 kilometers and fell dead from fatigue, muscle fatigue and dehydration. And I'll tell you something else about that dehydration. In April, May are the hottest months in this country. The government, to enforce what it was telling the Supreme Court about no migrants on the highway, passed a law, made a rule. No one shall walk on the highways. There will be no movement on the highways between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m., which are the coolest hours to walk. So instead, people walk between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. in temperatures touching 43 and 44 degrees Celsius Amongst them was little Jamlo, who fell dead 40 kilometers away from her mother's arms. Yeah? Little Jamlo fell down and died after having walked 160 kilometers. This is, by the way, what an Indian train can look like, with labor clambering to go. You can imagine the hygienic and disease-spreading conditions. There are many, many people who walked over 500 kilometers like these. And of course, the women carried children, they carried the loads, they did everything and walked, as they always do, the greatest distances, even in normal everyday life. And in the middle of all this, 4-5 state governments increased the number of working hours legally by ordinance. From 8 hours a day, we set back the gold standard of labor, 8 hours a day. We set it back 100 years by saying that you could make them work 12 hours and the remaining 4 hours would not be paid at overtime but pro rata. What you paid per hour in the first 8 hours is what you'll get in the next 4 hours. The impact on minorities like trans people, the LGBTQ communities generally, but trans people in particular, was horrendous. Yeah? They are anyway very fragile occupationally. These are trans artists from the city of Madurai, starving until the stories brought the attention of the minister who represents their constituencies. These are traditional folk artists, the trans people. They were starving, absolutely. What about their health? What about the health of the so-called criminal tribes, now decriminalized and denotified, whose traditional occupation is by force, by compulsion, beggary? They couldn't go anywhere. No one would allow them to come within a mile. Incidentally, how many of our journalists know that 720 journalists died of COVID-19 alone during the pandemic, not other diseases, COVID-19 alone. And that's a very, 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 conservative, rough estimate. We don't have figures from all parts of the country, but 720 till August 2022 is what we know. These were all the queues for people, many of them fooled into buying tickets, though the tickets were supposed to be free. Incidentally, we have no knowledge till now how many nurses died. We have some sense of how many doctors died, but nurses are second-class citizens. So we don't know how many nurses died in this country. The thing is that if you delude yourself on health, if you delude yourself on how great you are, how good you are, pharmacy to the world, our vaccines are the best in the world. Incidentally, in the last few months, 87 children have died in African and other countries of taking substandard Indian cough syrup and other drugs. It's a very, very delusional state that we are in. Now, what can we do about it? What could we do about it? Look, just imagine that maybe 7 or 8 centers in the world placed our COVID excess deaths at between 2.5 million and 4.5 million. That included Lancet, it included Johns Hopkins, it included lots of other places. But once we said 500,000, not one more or less. Actually, we said 486,000 and grudgingly increased it to 500,000. Now, just what do you do about this? The figures that tomorrow WHO will use will have to be Government of India figures, which will show what wonders we all did as a society and as a nation in fighting COVID. And in this, some people try giving you the actual data. We claim to be one of them at People's Archive of Rural India, but more importantly, we are getting, on the one hand, incredible figures of Indian success. On the other hand, other data sources of the government of India show us something very different. What happens when these two figures collide? Well, the director of the International Institution of Population Sciences, International Institute of Population Sciences, K.S. James in Mumbai, which presides over the huge National Family Health Survey, has been suspended because the NHS 5 over which he presided undermines all our claims on anemia. In fact, it shows that more than 50% of all Indian females about what age is that? 15 to 49. 15 to 49 are suffering from anemia. It undermines claims on hunger. It undermines claims on a hell of a lot of things. So the director of the institute, we live in a state of data denial delusions. So the director of the institute, because his relatively robust data questions officially mandated reality, has been suspended, and we can continue with our delusions. A raft of laws exists now to punish those who challenge this happy delusional state. Lastly, can we go back? The thing that irritates me is that every one of us knows what I'm talking about as much as I do in terms of the importance of socio-economic determinants of health. Okay, you had way back in 1960s, the United Nations Declaration on Hunger and Inequality. You had, by 1972-73, the UN program, Freedom from Hunger. Every nation in the world printed a postage stamp with the title, Freedom from Hunger. I know because my granddad got the 2 volumes of it when he went to the UN, and I have them. We're talking about 1972. Okay, what's that? More than 50 years ago. Then you have the Alma Ata Declaration, 1978. 134 nations meet and in very plain language tell us what we now try watering down by this ridiculous thing we call the SDGs. These SDGs are huge betrayals and lowering down. SDG 10 on inequality uses a lot of words to say nothing. Okay? In 1978, in Alma Ata, look at the fact that the UN Declaration on Health, Alma Ata on Health, all of them, their first paragraph begins tying health to inequality and hunger. The first paragraph of the UN Declaration begins on that. Every man, woman, and child has the inalienable right to be free from hunger and malnutrition. Okay? They start with hunger and malnutrition before coming to health itself. Society today, I'm talking about 1978 or 1973, society today already possesses sufficient resources, organizational ability, and technology, and hence the competence to achieve this objective, to wipe out hunger and malnutrition. Accordingly, the eradication of hunger is a common objective of all the countries of the international community, especially of the developed countries and others in a position to help. Note the focus in their talking on health is on hunger and hunger and nutrition. In Alma Ata, this was World Food Conference 1973. In the Freedom from Hunger, Alma Ata, Health for All by 2000. That was the slogan. Health for all by 2000. Now you look at the SDG goals. These goals were all meant to have been achieved by 2000 or 1980 or 1990. Now we project them as to possible to achieve half these goals by 2030 or whatever. You keep moving the goalposts. And this is what the Alma Ata Declaration by 134 countries, which was adopted by the United Nations, said. Health, which is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity, is a fundamental human right, and that the attainment of the highest possible level of health is a most important worldwide social goal whose realization requires actions in many other social and economic sections in addition to the health sector. You can't solve it within the health sector. Is it possible in India? Absolutely. In fact, the constitution of this country mandates it in the directive principles of state policy. It gives you the right to health. It speaks of that right to health. You do have that right. You do have that. That's where you are. We know it all. They knew it all 50 years ago. We know it all again 50 years later. Are we going to set ourselves new PDGs, SDGs, TDGs, and water down stuff further? Or are we actually going to do something about it? Maybe that's something you can discuss today. Thank you.